Welcome to Rapid Report, your go-to source for breaking international news and in-depth analysis. Today, we bring you the latest from Geneva, where the United States and Iran have entered their third round of indirect nuclear negotiations, mediated by Oman. Despite hours of discussions, no breakthrough has emerged. Washington demands a halt to uranium enrichment, strict limitations on missiles, and curbs on Iran's regional proxies. Meanwhile, Tehran insists on the lifting of crippling sanctions and the recognition of its right to peaceful nuclear energy. As diplomacy continues on this razor's edge, both sides are escalating militarily. The U.S. has deployed two carrier strike groups, USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford, along with thousands of troops and advanced fighter jets across West Asia. Iran, in turn, warns that any attack could spark a regional war that won't stay contained. In this rapid report, we break down the stakes, the strategies, and the narrow path to peace, showing you exactly why the world is watching Geneva closely. Make sure you stay tuned till the end, because we'll also explain what could happen if diplomacy fails and what this means for global security. The United States and Iran have embarked on a third round of indirect negotiations in Geneva, mediated by Oman, aiming to address one of the most persistent and volatile issues in global security: Iran's nuclear program. Despite several hours of discussions, observers report no tangible breakthroughs, highlighting both the complexity of the issues and the fragility of regional stability. The talks, which follow prior meetings in Muscat and an earlier Geneva session, involve high-level delegations from both countries communicating through Omani intermediaries. Both sides have described the atmosphere as serious and positive, yet there's little evidence that substantive agreements are forthcoming. Core dispute: Iran's nuclear program. At the heart of these negotiations lies a fundamental disagreement over the nature and scope of Iran's nuclear activities. The United States insists that Iran must halt all uranium enrichment and curb the development of missile programs and regional proxy networks. Washington argues that Iran's nuclear ambitions could enable the development of a nuclear weapon, posing a direct threat to U.S. interests and regional stability. Iran, however, maintains that its nuclear program is exclusively for peaceful civilian energy purposes. Tehran demands that crippling international sanctions be lifted and that its right to pursue nuclear energy be formally recognized. While both sides express a willingness to engage in diplomacy, their positions remain sharply divergent, leaving little room for compromise without major concessions. Massive U.S. military buildup. Complicating diplomacy is a significant U.S. military deployment across West Asia. Two U.S. carrier strike groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford, have been positioned near Iranian waters, accompanied by thousands of troops, advanced fighter jets, and refueling aircraft. Analysts note that this represents the largest American military presence in the region since the 2003 Iraq invasion. The United States appears to be pursuing a dual-track strategy, signaling openness to dialogue while maintaining a credible threat of military action. This approach underscores the high stakes, as both nations possess substantial military capabilities that could escalate rapidly if tensions are mismanaged. Washington's dual-track approach: U.S. officials have highlighted Iran's growing ballistic missile arsenal as a significant concern. Iran already possesses thousands of short and medium-range missiles capable of striking U.S. bases and allies in the region. President Trump has publicly emphasized a preference for diplomatic solutions, but has repeatedly warned that military action remains on the table if Iran fails to curb its nuclear ambitions. This strategy aims to pressure Tehran into concessions while keeping a pathway for negotiation open. However, the balance is delicate. Any misstep or misinterpretation could provoke a rapid escalation, potentially drawing the wider region into conflict. Iran's warning: any war would not stay contained. Iran has issued stark warnings that any U.S. attack would trigger widespread retaliation across the Middle East. Regional analysts warn that neighboring countries could quickly be dragged into the conflict, leading to unpredictable and potentially uncontrollable escalation. Both sides face a narrow corridor in which diplomacy must succeed to avoid military confrontation. The stakes extend beyond the immediate participants. Any escalation could destabilize global oil markets, disrupt international trade routes, and heighten geopolitical tensions involving allies such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, and European powers. A narrow path to peace. Diplomacy remains the only viable avenue to prevent conflict, but it requires difficult compromises on both sides. Analysts suggest that Iran would need to freeze uranium enrichment at existing levels, while the United States would need to implement phased sanctions relief in exchange for verifiable guarantees. Continued dialogue, even if slow and incremental, offers the only stabilizing option. Experts caution that a single miscalculation, military, diplomatic, or technical, could trigger a strike, spiraling quickly into regional war. The Geneva talks highlight a paradox at the heart of international diplomacy. While both the United States and Iran recognize the catastrophic consequences of open conflict, their positions remain deeply entrenched, leaving negotiators with a razor-thin margin for compromise. As the world watches, the third round of Geneva negotiations serves as a reminder that peace is possible, but only along a narrow, carefully navigated path. The coming days will test not only the skill of diplomats, but also the patience and restraint of military leaders on both sides. Strategic calculus behind the talks. The indirect nature of these negotiations, mediated by Oman, reflects the deep mistrust between Washington and Tehran. Both nations are carefully calibrating their moves to avoid losing face domestically or internationally. For the U.S., achieving a diplomatic breakthrough would demonstrate leverage over Iran's nuclear program without resorting to war, a politically and economically costly option. For Iran, insisting on its right to peaceful nuclear energy reinforces its sovereignty narrative and appeals to domestic national pride, especially after decades of sanctions. Analysts note that the lack of direct U.S.-Iran communication prolongs the negotiation cycle, but also provides both sides political cover. Oman's mediation serves as a trusted conduit, allowing the dialogue to continue without overt concessions in public, a diplomatic maneuver designed to minimize internal backlash. Military posturing as leverage. The unprecedented U.S. military deployment in the Persian Gulf and surrounding regions is not merely defensive. It is intended as a psychological signal to Tehran. The presence of two carrier strike groups, thousands of troops, and advanced fighter jets establishes a credible threat that any miscalculation by Iran could invite immediate retaliation. Conversely, Iran's rhetoric highlights its asymmetric capabilities. Tehran possesses short and medium-range ballistic missiles, a growing drone fleet, and regional proxy networks in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. These assets give Iran a form of strategic deterrence. Even a limited U.S. strike could provoke retaliatory attacks on regional allies, oil infrastructure, or maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. The interplay of these asymmetric capabilities creates a tense equilibrium where both sides must carefully weigh every public statement and military maneuver. One wrong signal, intentional or accidental, could tip the balance toward conflict. Regional implications. Any escalation between the U.S. and Iran would reverberate across the Middle East. Key regional actors, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, have their own security and economic interests tied to the conflict. Israel could be forced to take preemptive measures against Iranian nuclear or missile infrastructure, increasing the risk of a wider confrontation. Saudi Arabia and the UAE might bolster their defenses or consider offensive operations to protect their interests. Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria could become unintended battlegrounds due to the presence of Iran-backed militias. Moreover, energy markets remain acutely vulnerable. Even a hint of conflict could disrupt oil exports from the Gulf, leading to global price spikes and economic consequences far beyond the region. Diplomatic challenges and opportunities. While military posturing dominates headlines, Diplomacy still holds potential, but it depends on both sides navigating a narrow corridor of compromise. Iran's leverage comes from its domestic nuclear infrastructure and the economic pain caused by sanctions. Tehran may demand phased sanctions relief in exchange for incremental nuclear concessions. U.S. leverage lies in its ability to enforce sanctions and mobilize military power, signaling that escalation carries real costs. Negotiators may also explore creative solutions, such as temporary freezes on enrichment in exchange for humanitarian or economic relief. Limitations on ballistic missile testing tied to verification mechanisms. Engagement with multilateral bodies, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to monitor compliance. The success of diplomacy depends on both parties resisting maximalist positions and recognizing the catastrophic cost of miscalculation. The risk of rapid escalation, experts warn that even minor incidents, a misfired missile, an attack on shipping, or misinterpreted military exercises, could ignite a conflict that escalates far beyond current expectations. In such a scenario, the region could witness simultaneous fronts of military engagement, impacting global commerce, refugee flows, and international security alliances. The narrow path toward peace is therefore not just about negotiating nuclear concessions. It requires strategic patience, careful messaging, and mutual restraint in military posturing. Both Tehran and Washington must weigh short-term domestic pressures against long-term regional stability. That's your full update on the U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations in Geneva. The situation remains tense, the stakes remain high, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Diplomacy is ongoing, but both sides are walking a fine line between dialogue and military escalation. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with friends and colleagues, and subscribe to Rapid Report for real-time updates on global events. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a breaking story that impacts the world. We'll continue monitoring this story and bring you the latest developments as they unfold. Thank you for watching, and remember, staying informed is the first step to understanding the world around you.